Hello and welcome to Monster Monday. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about a mythical creature that is known throughout the worlds of D&D. I'm speaking specifically of the Manticore. All right, guys, so the Manticore has been around in D&D for many editions. It's a mythological hybrid creature, and you'll see creatures like this throughout mythology, where the myth takes a bunch of different animals and mashes them together to become a monster. And similar to other kind of what I'll refer to as mashup monstrosities, the Manticore is one that could be thrown into almost any adventure in a variety of settings. The Manticore could be a meager encounter. Manticore could be part of a whole adventure or even in an ongoing campaign. These could be cleverly used, and I will share my ideas with you about how to do that. But let's take a look at the Manticore first, a little deeper probe. So if you're following along at home, this would be in your monster manual. Today I'm using the fancy monster manual that I got as part of a gift from my friends Greg and Shelley at Wizards of the Coast. So, the Manticore, a monster in every sense of the word. A Manticore has a vaguely humanoid head, the body of a lion, and the wings of a dragon. A bristling mane stretches down the creature's back, and its long tail ends in a cluster of deadly spikes that can impale prey at impressive range. Manticores are fierce killers that hunt far and wide for prey. They work together to take down particularly large or dangerous creatures, sharing the meal once a kill is made. A Manticore begins its attack with a volley of tail spikes, then lands and uses its claws and bite. When outdoors and outnumbered, it uses its wings to stay aloft, attacking from a distance until its spikes are depleted. A Manticore isn't particularly bright, but it possesses a malevolent nature and the ability to converse. In the course of attacking, it denigrates its foes and offers to kill them swiftly if they beg for their lives. If a Manticore sees an advantage to be gained by sparing a creature's life, it does so, asking for a tribute or sacrifice equal to its loss of food. Manticores serve wicked masters that treat them well and provide regular prey. A Manticore might provide aerial support for an orc horde or a hobgoblin army. Another could serve as a hunting companion for a hill giant chief or guard the entrance to a Lamia's lair. The Manticore's greatest territorial rivals include chimeras, griffins, peritons, and wyverns. Manticores hunting as a pack often have the advantage of greater numbers. In addition to these creatures, Manticores fear dragons and avoid them. So right there in the text description for the Manticore, we have several ideas about how to implement Manticores. So I think let's start with the low level, then we'll talk about mid-level, and then higher level. So at challenge rating 3, a Manticore is by itself, just one, more than enough of a challenge for a low-level party. I would not throw a Manticore at a low-level party without caution, because it could very easily end up in a TPK. But if you had a group, a sizable group of experienced players who knew what they were doing, you could actually use a Manticore, I would say, against a group of third-level people pretty effectively. And the advantage of using a Manticore at low level isn't so much like, I'm going to take this monster and throw it at the party and see who dies and who lives. I think that you could integrate this in a story way that doesn't necessarily have to be resolved through combat. And here's what I mean. I'm envisioning a group that's traveling through open lands, and they find that there's this, area that seems to be once inhabited but now abandoned. And maybe upon further investigation, they find out that there is a nest of manticores nearby. curiously, they go to investigate this. One of the Manticores flies down and greets them and explains to them that they can either walk away or they could die and become food for the young lean Manticores. Maybe they decide to walk away. Or maybe the Manticore offers to broker a deal where he will spare them their lives, but they must bring him, 6 dozen cattle or some relatively large amount of food. So that creates a scenario now where you've gone from just an encounter to possibly an adventure. Maybe the Manticore, then being pleased with their sacrifice, says that he will make another deal, that he will spare the next town over from his wrath if they bring him some valuable object. Maybe the Manticore is seeking some treasure to enhance his sense of worth, and that treasure comes in the form of the head of another creature who he sees as an opponent. Maybe that could be, an orc chief. Maybe it could be the head of the lord of the nearby town. So now we've created this scenario where a Manticore is basically like blackmailing a party to do things. The party could eventually decide to stand up to the Manticore and take their best shot, or they can come up with a strategy to try to eliminate the Manticore in a more stealthy or sneaky fashion. But I think there's a lot of opportunities even at low level to use a Manticore as kind of a villainous person instead of just a monster. Of course, it is a monster. So the idea of using a Manticore to have them go recover an ancient magical tome probably isn't in the cards. But the head of an enemy, or a half a dozen cattle or something like that that's more simple, could create a little more of an adventure. How do they get the cattle? Do they steal the cattle? Do they have to buy the cattle and bring the cattle? Do they have to negotiate with the townsfolk and the farmers who own the cattle? There's a lot of potential social stuff there. Okay, let's talk about it mid-level. Let's say that we're doing a mid-level campaign and you'd like to use the Manticore. I think that what they set up here could definitely be an easy in, right? You have an orc horde or a hobgoblin army who have one or more Manticores. Watch your quantities here, because if you're talking about an orc horde or a hobgoblin army, that's already a lot of people, even for a mid-level group that's experienced and knows what they're doing. So I don't think you have to have a lot of Manticores in this situation. Probably 1, maybe 2 would suffice. But that kind of thing could be an encounter, an initial encounter. Maybe the party's encamped and they get attacked, kind of a strafing flyby attack by the Manticores. Unknown to the party that the Manticores then fly away, about a mile away. Maybe they track the Manticore and they find this orc camp or this hobgoblin encampment. Which could lead to other things. Maybe in the course of their investigations, they find out that the orcs are planning a raid on a town that's nearby that the party knows about, and the town needs to be warned. So this could expand into a multi-session adventure where you're featuring the Manticores as kind of these elusive enemies who can fly, strafe, attack, and then get away. When I think about a situation like that, I think of something as simple as The Hobbit. So you have Smaug, who's a winged creature, and in this kind of setting, how do you attack an enemy that's far away and moving quickly? Well, you either have ranged attacks, so you've got archers, or you have people blasting it with spells. And I think that creates a scenario where now the party has to be more strategic. They have to figure out how to do that. They can't just bulldoze in and hack and slash until the monster is dead. Maybe they have some strategy, and maybe they actually show some leadership skills and they recruit the militia in the town and the best archers and hunters from the area, and they set up kind of an ambush for the Manticores. So that I could see that working very well in a mid-level campaign setting as well. Now, to rewind and steal an idea from the low-level thing, suppose that you don't have an orc army or a hobgoblin army, but you still want to use Manticores against a party in an open setting. There could be hills or mountains where the party is traveling through, or even, it could be flatland areas, but maybe there's an old ruined tower that the Manticores have taken up residence in, or a ruined castle. And the party, whether they want to engage or not, have walked into the turf, into the territory of these Manticores. So you don't have to have the additional thing with orcs and hobgoblins. You could have just a small flock of Manticores, a troop of Manticores, and base it on the level of your group. So if you've got a bunch of, level 5 players, maybe you use 2 or 3 of these. If you've got a bunch of level 8 or 9 players, maybe you use 6 of them. So you adjust the quantity of them to scale it for the adventure. Now, these guys are only CR3, but if you're talking about a higher level campaign, maybe people who are level 12 to 15 or higher, all I would do is I'd still use Manticores, but I would use them almost in a fodder type fashion where, you have a fleet of 20 of these things attacking the party. So you don't have to actually adjust them too much. I think quantity here is the real balancing act when you're looking at, how many do you use in an encounter, in an adventure, where you're using Manticores and you're comparing it to the levels of the people in the party. So with that said, let's take a look at the stat block, and then we can also talk about how to scale the stat block to make them more or less challenging depending on the level of your party. So Manticores are considered large monstrosities who are lawful evil. They have a natural armor class of 14, 8d10 plus 24 hit points. So the average listed in the book is 68. Really easy to scale. If you want to make them more challenging, throw them, more hit points. You could round it up to 90 or 100 if you wanted them to be more challenging. They have a land speed of 30 and a flight speed of 50. So I really think that to make them more challenging might involve keeping them airborne and making them harder to hit. Decent strength, dexterity, constitution. Like the description says, they're not the brightest bulbs in the bunch. They have an intelligence of 7, but they are sentient and they're capable of communicating, which I think is kind of cool. They have dark vision for 60 feet. They do have the language of common. Now let's talk about their defenses and attacks. So tail spike regrowth. The Manticore has 24 tail spikes. Used spikes regrow when the Manticore finishes a long rest. 24 spikes is a lot. I mean, that's like a quiver of arrows. That's a lot of rounds of attacks. And that's not their only mode, but let's look at how that works. So for their actions, they have multi-attack. The Manticore makes 3 attacks, 1 with its bite and 2 with claws, or 3 with all with its tail spikes. The bite is +5 to hit with a reach of 5 feet, and it does 1d8 plus 3. Not huge. The claw is similar, +5 to hit, reach of 5 feet, 1d6 plus 3. Also not huge. The tail spikes are +5 to hit with a range of 100, max range 200, 1d8 plus 3 piercing damage. That is pretty far. That exceeds the range of a lot of spells and a lot of other ranged attacks. So what you're talking about here is that the Manticore can make effective ranged attacks with the tail spikes, strategically speaking. Could fly, get behind cover, make an attack, fly to another spot, get behind cover, make an attack. Now, if there's one of them doing that, that's one thing. But if you have 2, 3, or more, that can generate a real challenge in terms of strategy and combat. And as much as I'm a huge fan of storytelling and role-playing, I think that, sometimes if you have a group that hasn't been challenged by a creature other than just like roll initiative and it attacks you, in other words, a creature who's using its natural abilities effectively in strategy, I think that can be a fun encounter. Deadly, but fun. So the other thing I like about it is that the attacks with the tail spikes can affect more than one opponent. So I imagine maybe a Manticore coming by and strafing and just going boom, boom, boom and hitting 3 people. Or maybe concentrating a load of tail spikes on like the squishiest looking person, the person not wearing armor, a wizard or spellcaster who's unarmored. And then circling around, maybe taking cover, and then flying back out for another attack. I don't see a reason why a Manticore would logically like stay out in the open for everybody to shoot back at it. And specifically because they say they're not idiots, so if it sees that it's outnumbered, it would just fly away. Survival. It's an animal and a monster, but it has those instincts of survival like an animal. So if it's outnumbered, it's getting blasted all up by spells, it would just fly away. And its flight speed is such that the party likely would not catch up to it. At full blast, it would be out of their range within a couple rounds. So here's another spin on the idea of how to use the Manticore. Suppose for a second that the Manticore is not initially revealed as an enemy or a threat. Suppose that the party is approached by a noble who says that a area of his mines, he owns a claim where there's iron mine or copper mine or something, and that his mines have been attacked, his miners have been attacked, and he needs a party of adventurers to go investigate it. Very vague. And that could either be truthful, as in the noble literally doesn't know what's going on, or maybe he knows what's going on, and he's the reason why the Manticores are attacking that mine. Either way you want to play it, you can have it be so that a person is basically contracting the party to go on this investigative mission, find out what's happening at the mines, find out why some miners have disappeared, and then in the course of that investigation, the party discovers that in the rocks, in the hills above the mines, is a Manticore, like sacred Manticore breeding ground that they come to seasonally, and they kind of make nests, and that's where they live, and that only recently have these miners been kind of interrupting their land. So are the Manticores still evil in that case? Yes, because they're vicious and brutal, and they're not willing to talk to the miners. Or maybe you put a spin on it and you say they did. One of the Manticores tried to come down and talk to the miners, and the miners, rather than negotiating with the Manticore, just attacked the Manticore, and then the Manticore attacked back, and a few more Manticores came down. So you could scale this to be, a small family of Manticores, 1 or 2, with maybe a couple of youngling Manticores that you give like a quarter of the hit points to. Basically, I think in that scenario, it kind of flips the morality and alignment thing, and it adds a little more story. The characters in the party now have to resolve, well, this is kind of like the natural ancestral place for these Manticores, and these miners have come and kind of just started digging through it. Maybe you have some druids and rangers and barbarians in the party who would have empathy for the Manticores and their consideration that this is like sacred land to the Manticores. And they would actually maybe side with the Manticores. So if you remove the alignment for a moment and you look at the Manticore as just a creature, mythological monster, but still a creature who is trying to live somewhere and keeps getting messed with by these people and by civilization, you can develop a little bit of empathy for them and flip the script as a DM, so that now the players really have to decide, like, do we side with the noblemen and wipe out these Manticores, or do we side with the Manticores and tell the nobleman he's got to buzz off? And then how does that go down? Is that a social negotiation? Is there now a back and forth between that? How does that work out in the game? So I like to think of a lot of different ways to use creatures, as you guys have come to know with Monster Monday. And I feel like the Manticore is one of those creatures that everybody should know about in D&D, and they're easy to drop in. Here's another example. Imagine that some evil person has a Manticore captured, and they're actually in a dungeon, maybe even in a cell, and they can't crawl around very much. They don't have a lot of room in this cell, in this cage, and they're imprisoned, and the Manticore is willing to actually make a deal with the party and help them wipe out the rest of the denizens of the dungeon in exchange for his freedom. So there you have a lawful evil creature who is focused on survival and willing to make a deal with a party of good people and not even necessarily backstab them just to get free of his imprisonment. And that takes place entirely maybe underground and in an area where he can't fly, but he's trying to get out just like anybody else would who was imprisoned. So again, I mean, there are a ton of different ways that you could use these creatures. At the most basic level, use what they suggest here. They could be guardians of a lair. They could be in alignment and alliance with other creatures as support troops. They could be on their own in more of a kind of a natural setting. They could be an empathetic creature, or they could be a sinister villain. But a lot of different options with the Manticore, and they're just plain cool at challenge rating 3 with their abilities. You can use them in small numbers against low-level people, and adjust your quantities as you rise up in level, and always make things scalable. So I hope you have found this episode informative and or entertaining. And if you have had any cool encounters with Manticores, whether as a player or as a DM, please feel free to share with our community in the comments below, and we'll see you for the next Monster Monday.